I'm Natalia Bonner. Welcome back. Okay, I'm so excited to be here today and share this fun quilt block. So this is the Duck's Foot quilt block. This is part of my year-long series, Let's Stitch a Year of Blocks. So if you haven't heard about this series yet, let me just tell you a little tiny bit about it. So all year long, all through 2022, on the first Monday of every single month, I am sharing a free video tutorial where I share step-by-step how to machine quilt a quilt block. This month just happens to be the Duck's Foot. Now, in addition to me sharing these fun video tutorials here, I also have a class that coordinates with each one of these blocks that I am also releasing on the first day of the month. So this month is all about the Duck's Foot, and in that class I'm teaching you 12 additional ways to machine quilt a Duck's Foot quilt block with machine quilting rulers, free motion quilting, all sorts of different styles. It's a really awesome class. You can learn all about it. You can learn all about this whole series, pick up the workbooks, all the notions, everything you need over on our website, peaceandquilt.com. But today I am going to be using my 4-in-1 machine quilting ruler and my inside out machine quilting ruler and quilting this awesome quilt block. Now I do all of my quilting on a Gammill 22-inch machine. This is hand guided quilting. So I have my stitch regulator set at 12 stitches per inch. I love my stitch regulator on the Gammill machine. Alrighty friends, the batting that I'm using is 1 layer of the Quilter's Dream Poly Deluxe. The threads that I'm using on the top, So Fine color number 402. On my bobbin, I'm using Bottom Line color number 624. Let's hop over to my machine and let's get stitching. I'll start out this fun design by stitching in the ditch all the way around the outside of the block. Now, once I have my stitch in the ditch complete, then I'm going to break this block up into units. So I'm starting here in my upper left corner. I know on camera this looks like the lower left. You can really start in any corner. I'll start out that section by stitching in the ditch all the way around the outside of those units. Now I'm using my 4-in-1 machine quilting ruler. So once I've stitched in the ditch all the way around the outside, I'll get back to that point where I began stitching. From there, I'm going to adjust my ruler. Now when I'm adjusting my ruler, because I'm using a ruler foot, which you always need to do when you're using machine quilting rulers, I'm going to hold my ruler so it's 1/4 of an inch away from where I want my thread to intersect. From there, I'm going to stitch a curve from the outside to that inside point. Once I get to that inside point, then I'm going to stop. Now, anytime I stop and move my rulers, I like to stop with the needle in the down position. So from that point, now I'm going to stitch a second curve. This time I'm stitching to the point where the outside of that green triangle intersects the center peach colored triangle. Now, once I get to that point, then I'm going to adjust and use my inside out machine quilting ruler to stitch back to where I started. I'm going to repeat this process, working my way all the way across this orange section, peach section, whatever you want to call it, with those point-to-point curved lines. Now, once I have all of those point-to-point curved lines quilted, now I'm going to add some echoes to the outside of that section. So I'll start out using my 4-in-1 machine quilting ruler. I'm holding the edge of my ruler so the side of the ruler is right along the ditch, so right along the seam where my fabrics come together. From there, once I have that echo stitched around the outside, you're going to see that I'll travel and I'm going to stitch at first starting along my previous stitch line, but then from there I'm going to travel and stitch to those 2 center triangles where I'm going to add a fun, simple straight line right through about the center of each of those sections, just a way to add a little bit of interest to that green and blue triangle. All right, now that I have that first section complete, let's move on to the next. So working my way across my block, now I'm working on my sashing. I'm going to keep my sashing nice and simplistic. When I'm using machine quilting rulers, I like to hold the ruler as close to my body. So I'm either holding my ruler towards my body or on the left side. It feels most natural on those sides. But starting at that lower point towards the center of the block, I'll hold my machine quilting ruler and I'm going to stitch straight lines, filling in this section completely with evenly spaced lines. So again, I'm using the side of my ruler as my measurement. As I work my way up that sashing, then I'll adjust my ruler and stitch so those lines are evenly spaced a 1/2 inch apart all the way through. Now I've moved on to my second section on my block, I should say, and I'm going to repeat that process, working back and forth between the 4-in-1 machine quilting ruler and the inside out machine quilting ruler. Now this is a design you could do with just one of those rulers, but there are definitely times where it is a lot nicer to have the 4-in-1 or the inside out. So I do like to work back and forth with the 2 machine quilting rulers, stitching those point-to-point curves. Now that I have those point-to-point curves, I'm going to travel in. So this time I stitched my path a tiny bit different. I didn't start out by stitching in the ditch all the way around. I went right into those point-to-point curves. And then I'm doing my stitch in the ditch work as I stitch these top lines in those triangles on the top. When I'm machine quilting, if I don't go through and plan my path before I start, sometimes I'll quilt one block one way and then move to the next section of that block, and I might follow slightly different path. Now, I love to use the Sew Fine thread because if I do travel over my previous stitch line once, twice, a few times, I don't feel like I get a lot of thread buildup. That thread just blends so nicely. So I've added that echo to the outside white section on that block. Now that I've got that complete, I'm going to travel down to my next sashing and repeat that same process, stitching those evenly spaced straight lines using the first marked line on my machine quilting ruler, lining that up right on top of my previous stitch line, and then filling in that section completely. Now I'm going to travel down to my third section. On this third section, I'm going to start out with that stitch in the ditch work, but you'll see how I'll quilt those triangles on the top, well, the outside, as I do my stitch in the ditch work. So each of these blocks now, or each of these sections on my duck's foot block, I have quilted in a different path. I wanted to quilt them in a different path here to show you there is really no right or wrong reason. Do what feels best to you, what feels most natural. Now that I have that stitch in the ditch work complete and those straight lines through the outside, I'm going to go back and fill in this peach section, this peach triangle, using my 4-in-1 and inside out machine quilting ruler and stitching those point-to-point curves. From there, I'm going to use my echo stitch as my travel stitch. So I'll travel along the outside of that block, adding that simple echo stitch. It's 1/4 of an inch on the outside of my pieced block or the pieced fabric section, working my way to the next section. So a lot of times, I hope what you're starting to see is when I'm machine quilting, I'll look at one section, one unit, whatever you want to call it, but I'll break it down and quilt one at a time. A lot of times, at least for me, I feel like that makes it a little bit less overwhelming when you break it down into smaller units. Now I'm traveling to my next sashing section where again, I'll fill in with those evenly spaced straight lines. So now that I've stitched in the ditch all the way around that very center blue block with the traveling stitches from my other units, I'm going to just complete that center block. So I'm going to use the largest curve on my 4-in-1 machine quilting ruler and stitch some point-to-point curved lines to add a fun little star to that center unit. Now from there, I'm going to travel to my final section on this block and I'm going to repeat the process. This time I'm going to start out though on the center, stitching those point-to-point curved lines. Once I have those curved lines complete, now I'm going to add that stitch in the ditch work and those straight lines to the outside of my block. Now, stitch in the ditch work is not something you have to do on every quilt, but personally, I feel like it really finishes designs off nicely. So it's something you're going to see me do quite often. When starting out with stitch in the ditch work, our trailer or inside out machine quilting rulers are really great for that. The notches on the ends of those rulers, you can line up with your ditch and then stitch right along that ditch. So finishing off with that echo quilting around the outside of this section. Now I'm going to travel up. I have one more sashing to complete. I'll finish that with those evenly spaced straight lines. I love how this block turned out. Make sure you do join the full class, Let's Stitch a Duck's Foot Quilt Block. In that class, I teach you 12 additional ways to machine quilt this cool quilt block. You can find all the details plus join that class over on our website, peaceandquilt.com. Have a great day, everybody.